Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Good to see everybody. Man, I'm really cold. I hope it's not just me. Those things happen when you get older, yeah? We are in the book of 2 Kings, and we'll be finishing chapter 5. This is like the third week. We touched on it one week, then we were in it last week, and we're going to finish it this week. There's not a whole lot left in it. We'll be getting into chapter 6 for sure. I was talking with Robin on the way in here, and as you get more into the 2 Kings, especially when you're getting into chapters 9 and 10, you realize that these first nine or 10 chapters are not a long span of time, and it has to do with one thing. It has to do with Jezebel. And all of these stories are revolving around how God uses these people anyway, and in their lives to affect what he needed to do. And I just find it fascinating. It's amazing to read these things when we see how things work in God's plan. So He can work something out. In this case, it's a matter of justice, and we'll get into that. That's several chapters down the road. In the meantime, we see how all these people and their character come into His plan, and how it is that He uses them. We talked about the slave girl, and the servants of Naaman last week. We talked about how they were really instrumental into building the faith up of Naaman as well. And Naaman is a very integral part of this story on how God's plan is going to unfold for the justice He has to serve, because justice is God's job. That's what He does. And Naaman is very much a part of that plan. And it's just fascinating to see the depth of God. And believe me, I just scratched the surface. I know you all know that already. Okay, there are a couple of things we're going to get into, but before we do, let's have a word of prayer. Our gracious Holy Father, we're so thankful, Lord, that you have blessed us with your word, that with it we can come to know who you are and your beauty and your greatness and your love. And we ask at this time that as we look into it, that we would see you and that we would come to love you more and love one another more. In Christ's name, amen. Okay, so there was a question that came up last week after class, and I just wanted to ask this very quick. And if you don't have an answer, that's okay. I didn't have an answer, and I don't know that I have an answer now. But here's the verse 17 of chapter 5. Nathan said, "If not, please let your servant..." So Naaman is trying to give gifts to Elisha, right? And Elisha says, "No, I'm not taking your gifts." So Naaman said, "If not, please let your servant at least be given 2 mules' load of earth, for your servant will no longer offer burnt offering, nor will he sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord." So the question is, why does Naaman want this dirt? So there's a couple of mules, and that's going to be quite a bit. I mean, you can put quite a bit of dirt on a mule, I would imagine. Did anybody have any thoughts on that? I just kind of read right through. When you're reading, you think, oh, there must have been a custom of some kind. I read right through it, didn't think much about it. But somebody asked me, I said, I didn't think about it. Jeff?
I believe it's because he believes that God is the God of Israel, and that is Israel's land. He wants to take the land where God is dwelling with him, wherever he goes, so that he can worship Israel's God on Israel's soil.
Okay, that sounds very rational to me, right? You read it, and it seems like that's what that would be. Anybody else have anything? Dave?
Well, I read where, I don't know if it's true or not, but
Yeah, and that's along the line of what Jeff was saying. Along the line with Jeff, right? That, this is God's land. Obviously, this miracle happened to me. I'm going to take back some of that magic with me, or whatever it was he was thinking. He had a level of faith here. He had some measure of faith. I don't know. He actually had a great measure of faith, because he says he's not going to worship the other god, Rimmon, or whatever his name. He's not going to worship that god anymore. And that's why he's going to take this earth back with him. So there's a lot of things we can say about it. One of the things that I was told was that because this is the land promised to Abraham, he's taking it back. I can't repeat exactly how it was said to me, but that was one of the reasons. And then when Gehazi brought up Ephraim, who gets the double share of everything, right? Ephraim and Manasseh, they represent Jacob, who gets the double portion. It would have brought more weight to Gehazi's story. So somebody tied it all together for me, and I thought, wow, I didn't even go there. I wasn't even close. I was over here thinking simplistically. But it's fascinating to see these different thoughts. Also in Exodus chapter 20, very important chapter, God tells his people to make altars out of earth. And if you make them out of stone, you don't cut them. So he made some very specific instructions. The big caveat for that is how much of Israel's law would Naaman know about. So those are the big issues with those things. But it's fascinating to think about it. And at the same time, the most simplistic one of those explanations, I think, would hold true, that there was a superstition of some sort. That, wow, this God's great. I'm taking him back with me. I'm not even going to worship this other God anymore. Okay. So we left off with the very last question. Now, Gehazi goes out and he deceives Naaman into getting these gifts from him, which were pretty was a fair amount of stuff. A couple of changes of clothes and a bunch of silver, I think it was. So because of it, and we read that already, Elisha says, because you did this, the leprosy of Naaman is going to cling to you and your descendants. And the question is, what lesson can we learn from the leprosy clinging even to Gehazi's descendants? Does that mean? But how does that reconcile with Ezekiel 18? Okay, Ezekiel 18 says the sons will not suffer the sins of the father, or the father, and vice versa. Yes, Aaron.
Yeah, well, you said the word. There's a difference between the consequences of sin and the guilt of sin.
Okay.
Now, we know that the actions that we take, the decisions we make, the words we say, they have a ripple effect that go throughout. You could even say eternity. And we make decisions that impact not just ourselves, but those around us, and even the children that come after us and their children potentially. Now, this in particular is a punishment for Gehazi, that God is making a decision. And I don't know how leprosy is typically passed on. I don't know if that's a genetic disease. I don't think it is. I think it is
passed on. And from what I read, you have to be in contact with it for an extended amount of time before you will catch it.
Right.
So it's difficult, but it is transmitted that way.
Right.
That's what I read.
Yeah. So not through the DNA. So this is a kind of a supernatural thing.
Okay. Good point. Yeah, it's as simple as that. And my first thought went to David, and he's another example of the consequence of sin moving on down to the next generation. And he had all this trouble with his sons and all these things after his sin with Bathsheba. And so that you see that throughout the scriptures, right? We see not only does the father have to, or whoever sins the sin suffers the consequence of it, but maybe his relatives do as well. Anybody want to add anything to that? Is there anything else? Okay, so let's get into chapter 6. I said last week, we'll get into chapter 7. We're not going to skip chapter 6. Chapter 6. So this first story is just kind of simple. It's very simple. It's a very simple story. It's more Elisha doing great things, God doing great things through Elisha with this miracle and all of this. There's a lot of nuance in it, and we'll just get into it. And if you can see anything in there, just let me know what you see. So, starting at verse 1. Now the sons of the prophets said to Elisha, "Behold, now the place before you where we are living is too limited for us. Please let us go to the Jordan, and each of us take from there a beam, and let us make a place there for ourselves, where we may go live." And he said, "Go." Then one said, "Please be willing to go with your servants." And there's that nuance I was talking about. "Please be willing to go with your servants." And he answered, "I shall go." So he went with them, and when they came to the Jordan, they cut down trees. But as one was felling a beam, the axe head fell into the water, and he cried out and said, "Alas, my master, for it was borrowed." Then the man of God said, "Where did it fall?" And he showed him the place. He cut off a stick and threw it in there and made the iron float. He said, "Take it up for yourself." So he put it out of his hand and took it, or into his hand. Okay, is there anything interesting in this story at all, other than here's another miracle by Elisha? Obviously, that's interesting, the fact that he can make a piece of iron float to the top. Is there anything in there to see other than just that? Is there anything significant? Jeff?
Well, the person that lost the iron actually, realized the consequences, because it was borrowed. He needed to replace it, and maybe he couldn't afford to replace it and stuff like that. But it wasn't like, well, all right, that's lost, and just go on his way. It's like, hey, I have a responsibility here. I can't replace this, and stuff. I lost it. What am I going to do?
Okay, let's hold that thought. Aaron?
I think sometimes we hesitate to ask God for help with little things, and this is definitely a little thing. I mean, in comparison to the grand scheme of things and what you could ask for, an axe head.
Certainly today it would be, yeah.
And so even though, like Jeff said, it's very possible, it would have been very hard for this person to pay his neighbor back. But I think it's at least a reminder, a lesson for us that, God cares about the little things in our life too. And we should go to him with everything.
Okay. I would say, yeah, the little things and the big things, especially the big things. Yes, Gary.
It seems that Elisha did things just to help, not just to prove that he's a man of God. He had that reputation already, but yeah, like Aaron said, to bring that up compared to raising that lady or that lady's son from the dead, asking God to do that, a big difference. But it takes me all the way back to when Elisha asked for a double portion of Elijah's spirit.
Mm-hmm.
I think you even had a note about it in your notes a while back that I thought about it when I read that too, like, let me have a double portion, like how smart you are, or how wise you are, or how spiritual you are. No, I don't think so. To me, he meant so I could help more. And to me, these miracles that we read from Elisha, he's just trying to help many times.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. And so anybody else? Anybody else got something? Dave, go ahead.
Well, what I noticed, it's all incredibly cool, I mean, with the miracle and all that. What impacted me is that this thing was at the bottom of wherever it fell into, and Elijah throws a stick in, and what's that going to do? But what he did is he made it float. And the thing I was going to get at, so he asked the guy, "You pick it up, you do it." So
Well, okay.
there's some significance to that.
There is, isn't
Because
there?
Elijah, or God, could have just put it in the guy's hand. He didn't do anything else. Could all of a sudden, poof, there it is. But I think that's
Yeah.
pretty powerful.
Yeah, there's some things going on. There are things going on here, and the writer doesn't go into character development sort of writing to tell about what somebody's feeling or what they're thinking or anything like that. But we can see things, especially with the Hebrew language. There's so much context with words, and certain words can have change meaning with context. So, did Elisha want to go? Did he even want to go with these people? No, right? Kathy says no. No, he didn't want to. He didn't even want to go. And it was only because he was kind of, badgered to go. You need to go, We've seen this before. When Elijah's taken up, these guys come to him, some of these sons of the prophets come to him and say, God might have just thrown him on top of a mountain somewhere. There's 50 of us. Why don't we go look for him? And he says, no, don't go look for him. So they end up badgering him again until he's ashamed. He says, okay, go look. And then when they come back and say, oh, we didn't find him, he says, yeah, I told you, don't go. So we see this we see Elisha where he's trying to do things, and maybe he's helping, he's teaching, he's doing all of these things, and people aren't listening a lot. And this whole situation about let's go to the Jordan, he's like, yeah, go ahead. And so he reluctantly goes. This is what the rabbis write about it, that he reluctantly goes. That's the implication of the language. But more to the other point about the axe head and everything, this was a borrowed axe head. And like I mentioned earlier, axe heads today, you go to Home Depot and there are tons of them. To build an axe head back then would have been an ordeal, would have been a lot of work. Just, you have to get the raw materials, you have to, smelt it under a fire and have all the tools to make it. And it was borrowed. So I looked up, what is the law if you lost something borrowed? Does anybody know? Because I don't know. In this instance, I couldn't tell you. I was able to find plenty on borrowing animals. If you borrow somebody's animal, and there's all kinds of laws for that, about repaying things back. So the concept of repayment is there already. So you can make the assumption that this person knew he had to repay the smith for this axe head, or unless it was just somebody who had an axe head. And it wasn't going to be cheap. So if he can't pay it back, because he had to borrow it, he couldn't pay it back, what was going to happen in his life? Exactly. Okay?
Was the answer given?
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, he'd have to go into bondage.
Right. Yeah, that's what Aaron was saying. He would end up being a bondservant until that until the payment was done. And I don't know how they reconciled the price and how they, maybe they took, okay, you can borrow it, but if you don't bring it back, this is 2 months' work. Now this guy isn't, if he has a family, he's not at home with his family. Now everything's disrupted. So, when he says it's borrowed, there's a lot of meaning behind it. My life is totally disrupted now. This axe head is gone. And I assume that the Jordan was deep enough where he couldn't just walk out and grab it, right? Or maybe he couldn't swim and he was afraid. So there's a lot going on. There's all these nuances going on. And, I try to, because this is God working, I can't help but, make the application that there's a lot of things, again, I hate to kick, I don't want to say a dead horse because that's not a good term. But I say this a lot. Everything is pointing to the Christ in these stories, a lot of this stuff. And there are things that we have that don't belong to us, like our soul. They belong to God. And we can very easily lose those things. And only God can get them back for us. And this is what we see God answer through the Christ. And this is where we are today. We're so blessed. That's where I ended up with that. Through this axe head story, but, again, I can't help it. Because of Jesus, that's why we're here. Without him, we wouldn't be here. Okay, anybody want to add anything to that? Or? Yes, Greg.
I might even go along that same lines one step further. I don't think the imagery is lost on us, or shouldn't be, that the man was saved from bondage by the raising of something out of the water, made possible by a piece of wood.
Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah. And this is why I said in my first statement, when you see what God's doing here, with the images and with with something seemingly as banal as a little slave girl saying something to her mistress, I wish Naaman knew about that great prophet. Just seemingly nothing. It's a nothing. It's nothing. Or a servant saying to Naaman, hey, it's reasoning with Naaman. Hey, you may want to just try this. It's not a big deal, The nobodies, the little things like this, and when we see them revealed through the Christ, it's amazing. It's fascinating to me. Anything else? Okay, let's move along here. Now, again, we're going to get into this war thing. We just talked about Naaman. Naaman is a great Syrian general. And we're talking about leprosy. And it's interesting because leprosy, like in the Hebrew culture, is like, I can't be around you. But we see that maybe it isn't as much as what we see during the time of Christ, where they're all kind of relegated to one, don't touch them, don't be around them, kind of a thing. But more importantly to me is the Syrian war. It starts back in chapter 4 or so. There's a great Syrian war, and God is raising up Syria. He's getting the king to trust him, and I really want us to see this. And there's a one specific reason for this, and all of this has to do with 1 Kings. Okay, so starting at verse 8. Now the king of Aram was warring against Israel, and he counseled, excuse me, and he counseled with his servants, saying, in such and such a place shall be my camp. Then the man of God sent word to the king of Israel, saying, beware that you pass through this place, for the Arameans are coming down there. The king of Israel sent to the place about which the man of God had told him, thus he warned him, so that he guarded himself there more than once or twice. Now the heart of the king of Aram was enraged over this thing, and he called his servants and said to them, will you tell me which of us is for the king of Israel? In other words, there's a traitor here. I got a mole. Which one of it is it? One of his servants said, no, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet, who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. So he said, go and see where he is, that I may send him and take him. And it was told him, saying, behold, he's in Dothan. He sent horses and chariots and a great army there, and they came by night and surrounded the city. Now when the attendant of the man of God had risen early and gone out, behold, an army with horses and chariots was circling the city. And his servant said to him, alas, my master, what shall we do? So he answered, do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Then Elisha prayed and said, O Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. When they came down to him, Elisha prayed to the Lord and said, strike this people with blindness, I pray. So he struck them with blindness, according to the word of Elisha. Then Elisha said to them, this is not the way, nor is this the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom you seek. And he brought them to Samaria. That's kind of humorous in my mind. When they had come into Samaria, Elisha said, O Lord, open the eyes of these men, that they may see. So the Lord opened their eyes, and they saw, and behold, they were in the midst of Samaria. Then the king of Israel, when he saw them, said to Elisha, my father, shall I kill them? Shall I kill them? He answered, you shall not kill them. Would you kill those who have taken captive with your sword and your bow? Set bread and water before them, that they may eat and drink and go to their master. So he prepared a great feast for them, and when they had eaten and drunk, he sent them away, and they went to their master. And I'm assuming he took their weapons too. And the marauding bands of Arameans did not come again into the land of Israel. That last part is interesting because in the next chapter, the same thing happens, basically. So there's a story. This war with Syria or Aram, whatever you want to call it. And I don't know if this is Gehazi. Again, the reading doesn't say it's Gehazi necessarily. So the question is, what should we learn from verse 17? And verse 17 says, then Elisha prayed and said, O Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And atheists want to say those are aliens in spaceships. But I don't think that's true. Okay, so what do we learn from that verse? What do we learn from this story at all? Anything? Aaron?
Well, it's a remarkable story.
It is. It really is.
There's a lot here. One is Elisha could see those things, which is amazing to me. Like he knew that the angels were there and with him and protecting him. And he prayed that his servant would also see. So that's remarkable to me. We don't have a lot of insight in the scriptures to the spiritual realm and to
Yes.
angels and how that all works. But apparently, Elisha could see into the spirit world and knew that he was protected and surrounded by God's army, which that in and of itself is pretty remarkable. And, it's for us today, of course, I immediately go to 1 John 4:4, the verse that says, "He that is in us is greater than he that is in the world." And
Good point.
we have the same spiritual army surrounding us.
Okay. All right. Ida? Jeff, did you have some? Ida and then Jeff.
So we need to realize that this is not the true world. The true world is where God is.
Okay.
And God, in His wisdom and His compassion, left us a whole book where we can look through this world that we're in, and we can see His throne and His majesty and how He's working. And that's one of the reasons I believe Revelation is so
Revelation.
important.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Revelation. And to both of your points about we have limited knowledge of the spiritual world, but it's there. Yeah, John.
Yeah, how many angels does it take? One angel could have defended all that, but yet, what did he see? He saw the whole hillside covered. I mean, that's like an abundance.
Yeah.
All it takes is one. God, with God on their side, one angel down there, matter's taken care of. But he sent the whole host there.
Yeah. Yeah, that had to be, we live near a hill. Actually, we live on a hill. And I try to imagine what that would look like behind my house if I was to look back there or across the valley. Had to be so encouraging for this person to see that. I'm assuming it's Gehazi. I don't know. I could be wrong. Because I really see a lot of this as this training. Elisha he's training these people because back in 1 Kings, all of these, all the Levites left. Then you have all these prophets who are they're prophets of God, but they're kind of like not good prophets of God, but they're still kind of prophets of God. And a bunch of them are killed. And then you have these sons of the prophets. And so somebody needs to be training somebody to be prophets of God. And I just see this as a training. This was part of Elisha's mission, was to help people remember who God is, because they drifted so far away from the whole thing. And they were so far gone that they just couldn't see God from who He is. And it just gives us that glimpse into the spiritual realm. So a few things about this. Where do we see this? Where else do we see this concept of feeding your enemy or loving your enemy? Yeah. Here.
Our warfare is not with flesh and blood, but with principalities and powers, kind of like what Ida was saying. That's as real as you can get.
Yeah, and Paul takes you there, right? He talks about that when who's he speaking to on that? I had that written down here somewhere. In Romans. he's talking about that. He's trying to unify the church, and he's trying to tell them, you need to behave as Christians, and because the stuff going on between us, the stuff between us and our government, has little to do with the real war that's going on. We're not just talking about governments. We're talking about that spiritual realm, and that we're God's people. And if we're in God's army, whatever that might mean, that's what we're a part of. And this, Jesus taught essentially that same concept in Matthew. I think it's chapter 5. He talks about loving your enemy. Love your enemy. Realize that what you're seeing here is a reality, but it is not the spiritual realm where we will all end up. And that teaching actually goes back to Solomon, is the one who I think first taught feeding your enemy. So this has a lot more to do with the spiritual realm, and it's so easy, we all know this, I think, to lose sight of that fact. We can despair. We see the world turning upside down, and wars going on, or rumors of wars and earthquakes or whatever, and we can get caught up in the mayhem of the reporting of that kind of thing. And we belong to God, and we have mountains of people cheering us on, waiting for us, that kind of thing. Anything else? Anything else anybody wanted to add to that? Okay. So we're going to finish this chapter. Let's go start at verse 24 through 7, and verses 1 and 2. We'll read this, and again, a lot of this has to do with what's going to happen in the future chapters. I just wanted to kind of direct our attention to that. All of this has to do with God's justice. These are all just actors, and we're not at that final act yet. Now it came about this, after this, that Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, gathered all his army and went up and besieged Samaria. Okay, I thought they weren't going to be there anymore. What happened? Well, that term means probably for a time after this good thing that they did. They probably didn't have war with them for a time. There was a great famine in Samaria, so here we have this siege happening from Syria, and there's a famine on top of that. And behold, they besieged it until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver, and a fourth of a cob of dove's dung for 5 shekels of silver. So that's important to see that. As the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him, saying, "Help me, my lord, O king." He said, "If the Lord does not help you, from where will I help you? From the threshing floor or from the winepress?" He was being kind of sarcastic. He's like, "Hey, what am I going to do?" And the king said to her, "What is the matter with you?" And she answered, "This woman said to me, give your son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow." So we boiled my son and ate him, and I said to her on the next day, "Give your son that we may eat him." But she has hidden her son. This is horrible. When the king heard the words of the woman, he tore his clothes. Now he was passing by the wall, and the people looked, and behold, he had sackcloth beneath his body, on his body. Then he said, "May God do so to me and more also, if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, remains on him today." So he's enraged. Now Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him, and the king sent a man from his presence. But before the messenger came to him, he said to the elders, "Do you see how this son of a murderer has sent to take away my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold the door shut against him. Is not the sound of his master's feet behind him?" While he was still talking with them, behold, the messenger came down to him, and he said, "Behold, this is evil from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?" Then Elisha said, "Listen to the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, tomorrow about this time a measure of fine flour will be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria." The royal officer on whose hand the king was leaning answered the man of God and said, "Behold, if the Lord should make windows in heaven, could this thing be?" Then he said, "Behold, you will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat of it." So, this is one of the worst stories in the scriptures you can ever read. It's brutal. It's brutal. So Syria is besieging Samaria, and basically, a siege is just. It's not necessarily an attack, a direct attack. A lot of times the tactic was to just close off any supplies that could get in or anything like that. And because there's a famine, it's not like they were able to grow any food inside where they were. So obviously they are at the stage of starvation here, and that's what's happening. We see cannibalism happening, and the king hears about it. So in verse 25, why does the writer use a donkey's head and dove droppings as examples of the severity of the famine? What should these things be used for? I hope somebody has an answer for that, because I don't have an answer for that. Why is that brought up? Okay?
Well, these things were unclean. They were not what they were supposed to be eating,
Yeah.
but they were so desperate they were eating things that were
Okay.
unclean. And the dove droppings, I would suppose, would be used for fuel. But
Right.
something else I read said that that might be a slang term for some kind of beans. So I don't know.
Yeah, I read a few of those things too. Yeah, I think the main point of that whole thing was there was nothing to eat. There was simply nothing left to eat. So if you could find anything, and this was the disparity, desperate times for them. Syria was on, they were on death's door, essentially. And you could see the despair within the king. This woman comes to him and asks him to save her, and he's like, God's not saving you. What makes you think I can do it? So he's given up, and it's just the main point of it is to just show the level of depravity that it had to happen at that point. And this is, we'll talk about this next week. Just keep this thought in your head. Who does the king blame? Elisha. The king blames Elisha, and we'll get into this. We'll finish this next week. King blames Elisha, the servant of God. And does this happen today? And we'll get into that next week. Thank you.